One of the big lessons I've learned throughout my career in tech is to choose not to be controlled by fear.
Maybe I want to leave a company like that, but can I survive out there? How did you process that?
I felt like I need to be part of trying to solve this problems in my country.
What would be your best piece of advice to anybody getting into Apple especially?
So if you don't want that fast pace, it may not be a good fit for you, which is why I keep harping back, know why you're doing this, why it's important, how it connects back to the bigger picture objectives of whatever team you're on so that you can prioritize better and you manage your energy better.
You are a CEO of a company. How do you find the balance between your career, your work, and maybe even your personal relationships?
I see family or relationships and business as not like conflicting, but have an answer. Mm-hmm. You know, who are you and why do you do what you do?
Hey, everybody. I'm excited to have somebody with me today who has been a leader in helping to grow entrepreneurship, not just among her family, but her culture and her desire to give back. And I am so excited to be talking to Christeen Rico, or should I call you Christeen Joy?
Christeen is fine.
Christeen is fine. Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So Christeen is someone who grew up in the Bay Area in Daly City in South San Francisco. She went to college at New York University. She worked for Apple and has a long history of her experience working in tech. During her transition and working in a tech company, she decided that she had a bigger purpose. She wanted to give back more to the community, back to her Filipino culture. And she has now decided to become an entrepreneur and a CEO of her own company. Dream Bigger Philippines, or just Dream Bigger?
Dream Bigger Ventures.
Dream Bigger Ventures. So
yes.
We're going to have a lot to talk about that. And I'm so excited to have Christeen with me. Thank you for coming on today.
Thank you,
It's
Mike.
an honor to have you here. And when I first heard about you and what you were doing, it really struck a chord that for millennials, especially people who live around here in the Silicon Valley area, you went through a path that a lot of us wanted to go through, were told to go through, and a lot of us did. And your experiences going through it and what you learned, I think can really resonate with a lot of people who may be wondering, am I doing the right thing? Am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? My parents said I'm supposed to do this. The world tells me I'm supposed to do that, but what's really working here? So your story of how you transitioned from tech to becoming your own CEO is a very inspiring story, and I can't wait to hear it. But before I get into that, I want you to start off telling me your story. How did you come to where you're at now? What would you learn growing up? And I understand you're first generation here in this country.
Yes.
So when did you come to the States?
I was born in the Philippines, in Pampanga, which is a province a couple hours north of Manila. And I was the youngest of, or I still am, the youngest of 8 kids.
Wow, big family.
So there's a 18-year gap between me and my eldest brother. We were all born in the Philippines. And, during the 80s, my dad, this was before I was born, my dad was having trouble finding work in the Philippines. And like many millions of Filipinos, he decided to take the opportunity to go to the U.S. to get a better job opportunity to provide for his growing family. And so for 7 years, my dad was in the U.S. doing his thing, working, and mom was in the Philippines with the kids. And they did this long distance, marriage for a while. And thank God, after 7+ years, all the details worked out so that my dad could bring his whole family to the U.S. So we landed here in California in the Bay Area. I remember the first stop off of the plane was my grandma's house in San Francisco. She's gone to be with the Lord now, but it was a surreal thing just for all the details to work out, for everyone to be reunited. Not many Filipino families have been able to enjoy that kind of experience, unfortunately. So I feel very blessed and privileged to have that. And so I, as the youngest, I was 3 years old at the time. And so I ended up growing up primarily in Daly City, as you mentioned, grew up in Daly City, went to high school in South City, and grew up in a very predominantly Filipino immigrant community. And my life growing up was pretty much, family, very Filipino at home. And thank God for that, actually. I still speak Tagalog. I still can speak Kapampangan, which is our dialect from the Philippines, and I can understand all of that.
Wow.
And then church. My family, that was a big part of my growing up is we were part of like a church plant with other Filipino families who were followers of Jesus. And then school. So it was like home and church and school. And a lot of Filipino immigrant families surrounding us, supporting each other and helping each other.
Oh, that's pretty.
Yeah.
That's not,
and basketball.
And basketball. Okay. That's the other one. I'm saying
that was the other one.
That's a very traditional. It's very typical of the same story that I hear a lot from a lot of first generation Filipino-Americans. Is that this is what we grew up with. This is what we know. This is what we strive for. So you came here at what age again?
I was 3.
You were 3 years old. Okay, so pretty much immersed in the American culture relatively fast. As you were getting older and you were getting into junior high school and high school, were you facing any sort of expectations from the parents about what you were supposed to do? Were you kind of going along with it, or did you kind of feel, you know what, maybe I want to try something different than what my parents are telling me I should do at that age, at least?
Yeah, it's, I knew that my parents worked really hard for everything that we could have. Dad worked really hard, mom worked really hard. And while there weren't any explicit things listed like, oh, you have to do this or you have to do that, because I was also the youngest, I also observed how my siblings went about their path. And I observed things that worked well and maybe things that did not work so well.
Gotcha.
Things that caused my parents stress and things that my siblings did that caused my parents joy, and I just internalized all of these observations, being the youngest.
Right.
And decided, I want to try to do more things that are going to hopefully bring my parents joy and make them proud. And so, but the big message from my parents, especially my dad's voice is a very important one in my life. Thank God for my dad. But, two things that he always emphasized to me were do things with integrity, and then work hard. And, don't take shortcuts. That was very important to him. And of course, as a young kid, you want to just go fast and,
I remember that, yes.
Speed past, when I started driving, right, you just want to go as quickly as possible to the destination, or, you're running late a little bit to school, so maybe, you'll just go a little bit faster than you're supposed to. But, my dad's voice was always, just do the right thing, don't take shortcuts, and work hard. And that was the main expectation. But thank God I was able to do well academically, graduated valedictorian in high school, created some of those moments, right, that made mom and dad pretty proud. I was the first in my family to go out of state for college. And I got into the universities that I wanted to go to, and decided to go to New York, as you mentioned earlier, which was a first, and parents were a little uncomfortable with that.
I was going to say, how did that come off, saying, hey, mom and dad, I'm going to go all the way to New York, with the typical thing that, aren't you supposed to stay here with a family? How did that go over?
Yeah, mom was pretty much, why don't you just stay nearby, go to the UC, so-and-so. My sister, who's 8 years older than me, she kind of paved a little bit of that path. She decided to go to UC San Diego, which, again, farther out. We were still in Daly City, so she kind of went off, and I guess, that inspired me too, and I thought, hey, why not go to New York? I'd never been to New York City at the time, so I did all my college application, research online. I didn't visit any of the campuses that I applied to, but I looked at them online and I thought, it would be really interesting to go there. And one of the reasons for New York was because, my 17, 18-year-old self felt like I wanted to live in a city.
Yes, yeah.
That was the big motivation. I felt like a city environment was something I was craving at that age.
I believe it.
And so New York just seemed like the the place to be if I could get there. I didn't have any family there.
Right.
We didn't know anyone in New York. I'd never even visited for any vacation. So it was a big, just dream, aspiration, and I got in. And so the first time I ever visited New York City was after I already accepted my college, admission. So that was, Mom was pretty nervous about it. Dad, on the other hand, he just said, go for it. And the other thing about NYU is it's a private university. So it's not only that it's far away, it's also very expensive.
Very expensive, yes.
Yeah. And I was at the business school, and there were just all these other costs associated with that. And, even with scholarships and financial aid and stuff, it still felt very much like a stretch from my family. But Dad said, go for it. If you think you can do it, just go for it. So I did.
That's incredible to have that level of support, being the first one to, well, your sister went out of the area, but still within the States. So I guess it kind of felt like she was close enough. But you
I guess, thank God for her, because she did well, And so it set this little precedent that, okay, maybe, it's not so bad.
Wow.
And maybe my family calls me Joy, actually. So
that's work.
School calls me Christine. My full name is Christeen Joy. School and work, it's Christine, and my family calls me Joy. So they're like, oh, maybe Joy is gonna be okay.
I mean, you want to talk about inspiration? That's just. Tell me about that first day you got to New York. You've never been there before. You're going to school. What was that realization like? Did it hit you that this is real? This is a big city. I don't know my way around. Where's my, what was going through your mind that first real day, especially?
So in high school, I used to watch a lot of Law and Order. Law and Order SVU. And so, first things that came to mind was that music, the dun 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 dun.
Was that playing in your mind when you got off the plane?
Yeah, pretty much.
Wow.
But aside from that, I really enjoyed it. So my first time visiting was after high school graduation. There was a summer orientation, and my parents couldn't afford to send me there, but my sister, one of my older sisters, actually jumped in and offered to take me. And so I was able to visit New York for a couple of days for that little orientation before I fully moved into my dorm, for the school year. And so that first trip, the first couple of days for that little mini orientation, I mean, we got the New York pizza, the New York hot dog. I felt really proud. I hailed my first cab by myself. I felt like that was the New York thing to do.
Was it before Ubers came out? Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you jump on the subway?
Yes, we took the subway. We did all this stuff, and I really enjoyed the energy immediately. That was my big question, was I wonder if I could do it. In my high school, 17, 18-year-old self, and I'd never been to New York. I just wondered, I wonder if I could survive there,
I mean, it's amazing.
And I enjoyed it. The first time I visited, it was just a totally different energy from Daly City.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. It's to be able to put yourself in a position where you don't know anybody, you've never been there, and to still be able to say, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to enjoy my time here at NYU. I'm going to absorb as much of the city as I can to really, it's such a dream for a lot of young people to be able to say that they come from a smaller area or a small town. They think they're never going to leave, wherever that's at in this country, and to be able to go to the complete opposite, like the Big Apple, a big city, far away from anything you ever grew up with. It's exciting. It's scary at times. Yeah. There's probably a lot of questions like, wait, can I do this? What about this bill or whatnot? But it was, I can only imagine just how awesome of an experience it was.
But I will share. So that was my initial visit, just for the orientation. And then I had to move into my dorm as a freshman. So that was, no one in my family could come with me. So I literally packed my bags and had my boxes and flew out by myself to move myself into my dorm. So I took a red-eye flight at SFO, 11:30, so that I arrive at JFK in the morning. Mm-hmm. And that was a very emotional red-eye flight.
Wow.
for sure. My friends from high school, including Kat,
Mm-hmm.
and a bunch of my friends from high school, my family were kind enough to, drop me off at the airport and see me off. And then I was bawling. I was just bawling on the plane because then it hit me. It's not just a visit.
Yes.
I'm really gonna live there. Like I had all my boxes and my clothes and everything, and no one's here with me.
Wow.
So I was bawling on the plane, but it was a red eye. So then the lights were off and everything, and I eventually fell asleep. And I woke up and I was in New York, and I got to my dorm and it was empty, and I had my boxes, and I just kind of sat there for a little bit, like, okay, I'm doing this.
Wow.
And then it was orientation, my RA. When you live in a dorm, you have like a resident assistant.
Yes.
So I think a couple hours later, I get a knock on my door like, hey, it's orientation week. We're going to head up to Madison, Madison, I'm forgetting the name now. Like Madison Gardens.
Oh, Madison Square Garden.
Madison
The
Square
arena?
Gardens, the arena, correct, because they were doing a freshman welcome at Madison Square Gardens.
Oh, nice.
And so I was like, okay, well then, and we just kept going. But it was a surreal feeling. Like I still remember those hours, landing at JFK and moving myself in, and that moment just hitting me. Like, this is real.
I can only imagine. I never got the chance to go across country. I wanted to go for graduate school and never got into the schools I wanted. So it was always something that I thought would ever experience a similar thing to what you did.
I would recommend it, hands down. Looking back,
Oh, the experience
100%.
of getting, just if nothing else, almost regardless of you have your major when you go, just the fact that you're getting away from what you grew up with and you're kind of getting out there,
right.
experiencing
and
life.
it may not even be college, right? I mean, there's so many different options to get out there, get out of your comfort zone and travel. It doesn't need to be college, but just that experience of being by yourself in a new environment and choosing to do that, it's life-changing.
And you were there for 4 years? Or did you
Yeah.
Okay, great. As you're leaving NYU, what's the first thing on your mind? Did you have a job lined up, or was it kind of like, I have this degree, I don't know where to go? Were you thinking about your student debt? What was on your mind as you were graduating?
I mean, definitely, immigrant family, right? Finances were always a little bit in the back of my mind. And I knew coming in that I would have student debt. And so my mindset in college was, there's no turning back. Like, you have to do this. Even when it's hard, you have to finish this. And you have to get a job, because you cannot depend on your parents supporting you. You have to do this. Like, there was no other option. You just have to. And there were hard days. There were days when I was like, why am I doing this? Why am I studying this thing? Why am I getting this? I did a dual bachelor's and a master's at the same time. So,
Jeez, wow.
And there were, days when you just don't feel like it. But I think that was a big thing that I learned, was doing things even if you don't feel like it. And thank God my, NYU does provide a lot of career support, and that was one of the advantages, I guess, of being in a business school like the Stern School of Business. Like, they just provided a lot of that career support. And so as a junior, I got an internship at a big firm in New York, and that became a full-time job opportunity, which I did recruit with other firms, but I decided to continue with the firm that I interned with. And so I was blessed to have, my senior year, even before I started my senior year of college, I already had a job offer.
Wow.
Lined up for graduation.
Now, going into that, did you enter college or NYU with the mindset of, I'm going to go for business, I'm going to go for law? Or was it, I'm going and then I'll sort of figure it out as I get there and see what happens? Did you already have a preconceived notion?
I had an uncle I still have an uncle who's a lawyer. And so there was my uncle who was a lawyer, and then the rest of my family and a lot of my siblings were in some kind of health care.
Right.
And so growing up, I just had those two options in my mind as possibilities. Those were the two primary options. And so I knew I didn't want to go into healthcare for a number of reasons. I don't like hospitals. I don't like blood. Just all those things.
Gotcha.
Science is fine, but just the environment, I just felt like, okay, not a good fit for me. And so the other option, the path to success that I had seen, was this lawyer path. And so growing up, that was always my go-to response. Like, I'm going to be a lawyer. And so coming into NYU, that was the long-term, idea, is that eventually I'll go to law school. But before I get to law school, I need, some kind of degree that'll translate into a decent paying job so that I could be financially independent and then start helping my family in some way. And so that's where the business, and then studying accounting and management and business, that's why that was a decision, because I knew that it was kind of a practical, degree and practical step that would translate into a job before I could go to grad school.
Gotcha.
Where that came from, honestly, I have no clue. I mean, it was probably just observing and researching online or whatever, because I didn't my parents didn't go to college here.
Right.
There's only a couple of us that actually went to college in the US. So a lot of this college planning was very creative. Like, there wasn't any
there's nobody
structure.
to go to example. Right. I get you.
Correct. And Google, to be honest, just researching online and trying to, and then intuition, that belief in myself that, okay, maybe I could do that.
So with that, during your process at New York University, did it, by the best way to say it, did it feel right? Like, you're going down this path, it's going to lead to an internship and possibly a full-time job. The money's there. If I have this career, I know it's going to look good for me and my family, because they're going to say, oh, you're a lawyer in New York. Ooh. It's just a perception everybody has. But in your mind, was it like, did it sit right with you deep down that this is what I should be doing?
I did really enjoy the environment. Quite frankly, I went into the business school not really knowing exactly what business was. Mm-hmm. And so I came into it, and my peers in the business school, many of them were already, as freshmen, like in the first month, thinking about internships at Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Barclays, JP Morgan, and in my head, I was like, I don't even know what those firms are. Like, I didn't know what those companies did, because they just were not familiar to me and my family growing up in Daly City.
Yeah, like exactly.
That world of investment banking or finance wasn't known to me. And so I came into this environment, and I immediately felt like I was behind. And it was a really humbling feeling, which for some people that might be intimidating, like, oh, I'm so behind, like I'm never gonna be able to catch up to what my peers know. But I kind of took that as a challenge, that I realized there's a lot of things that I don't know. So how do I learn? And that was always my mindset, is how can I put myself in positions to learn? And as I learned, I actually discovered that business was a good fit for me, which is why I dropped the lawyer dream. That was such a big part, because like I said, I didn't know to dream anything else.
Right. Yep.
I didn't know to dream anything else. So I just defaulted to what I knew. But when I discovered all of these other possibilities through NYU, right? This whole world of business, and all the creative ways that you can build products and impact lives through business. And then I even studied abroad. I went to Prague for 6 months, and I got to see many countries all across Europe, and that opened up my mind. We went on international projects in Singapore, So NYU kind of opened up my eyes and my mind and my imagination to the rest of the world. To the rest of the world that I didn't even know existed. And I think I needed that environment to discover more of who I am, that maybe my home environment, like I was kind of subconsciously you know, trying to fit into the existing models of success, you know, and assuming that that was the only path. But that whole NYU experience opened up these host of possibilities that began to expand my dreams.
Well, you sort of answered my question for me, because I was going to ask you, what gave you the courage to say, I'm in my comfort zone in the lawyer field, because it's either lawyer or healthcare, and now you know, I get a chance to study abroad, and it just sort of like it opens up the floodgates. Now I kind of get a big picture of what the world's about. So tell me about how you got into tech, and why tech? Because you weren't going to come back to the Bay Area for a while. So what was that experience in NYU after, I guess, your internships abroad that said, you know what, I'm going to take a shift and do something different?
So the practical steps there, I guess, you know, yes, there was the whole education part happening while I was at NYU. Mm-hmm. There was another thing happening inside of me that was this growth in my sense of identity as a follower of Jesus. So my faith actually grew a lot in university. And I grew up in a Christian home. I mentioned earlier, you know, my family was very involved in like a church plant. And so, and for many Filipinos, you know, that I think faith is always an important component of the culture. Mm-hmm. But being away and going to college actually made it much more personal to me. And it like just became central to who I wanted to be. Gotcha. That more than anything else, you know, more than getting this whatever degree, multiple degrees, or more than getting this high paying job, or, you know, that title, more than that, I wanted to be a committed follower of Jesus. And I wanted to live that out consistently in, you know, all areas of my life. And so that shift in my sense of identity motivated a lot of like my next steps, because my aspiration was to stay in New York City, because that felt like the cool thing to do. I mean, I worked all that, you know, that's how I felt. I worked all that way to get there. I might as well stay during my 20s, you know, yes. Post-college, and all my friends were there. Mm-hmm. And I already had a job lined up in New York City. Like my offer was to stay in the New York City headquarters for that firm. And so it was like in my hand. And so to actually request to move back to be based in California for me felt like going backwards. It felt like going backwards. That was at that time, right? Because I left California, moved to New York, and felt like I, you know, made the like I ticked the boxes on the things that I wanted to achieve, and I had it there. I had the offer. I could stay in New York. I had that community there, and to move back to California again felt like going backwards. So the only reason why I did it, to be honest, was because I felt like it was what God wanted me to do. And it's might be a weird thing to say, but that's the truth of it. And I felt like I should at least try it, because I felt like it was what God wanted me to do, and I should at least do it. And if I hate it and I decide it's not the right thing, I could always go back.
Yeah.
I could always go back to New York, because I did, you know, invest a lot in those relationships, and perhaps, you know, the company would allow me back anyway. So I was thinking, there's no loss in this moving to California, if I feel like it's a thing that God wants me to do. But all of that said, the partner at the firm that offered me the job in New York, he recommended, because I said, can I be based out of San Francisco instead of New York? And he said, hey, why don't you be based in San Jose instead? Because we have a growing technology practice there.
Okay.
Again, I wasn't thinking in that way. I was thinking I was going to stay in New York City. So I was not looking at all at like tech careers or Silicon Valley. It wasn't on my mind. And San Jose, because of where I grew up in Daly City, I don't know, San Jose felt so random. Like we never went down to we barely ever went down to Silicon Valley. If anything, San Francisco felt like the cooler city, at least at that time, right? And so I know. Anyways, so thank God for that partner. And he recommended that I be based out of San Jose. And that opened up again, so my career started always in Silicon Valley because of that recommendation that I listened to. And I started working on software clients and got, a lot more exposure to software development and this whole tech scene.
That's see, it's funny how things work out sometimes. You have this great career and you think, I'm going to stay in New York City, and something doesn't feel right. You want to come back to California. You make the right conversation with somebody high up there, and he says, well, I'm glad you brought that up. Look at this opportunity that's going to come up that you probably would have never asked for or never thought about had you not said, hey, I'm motivated to come back to California for work, for non-work related reasons. Is there a way that I can transfer my career over here? And opportunities come up in such the weirdest ways.
Yes.
So how did that, you made that transition back to San Jose. Was it a smooth transition to come back here?
I hated it. I really felt just deep down, I felt like I was going backwards, and that feeling, because all my friends, and all these relationships that I'd invested in throughout college, like they were all in New York. And I was the only one that at the time that came back. But fast forward a couple of years later, a lot of, there's a good chunk of people from my graduating class that have shifted to the Bay Area to pursue, the tech industry jobs. But at the time, because I was, one of the only people that I knew from my graduating class that was moving back to California. Like I felt like the oddball out. I hated it the first 2 years. I would be so miserable driving on the highway and just feeling like I wish I were walking around downtown Manhattan and not driving on the highway 280 right now.
It's no, I definitely see where you're coming from with that. If I had stayed in my hometown after graduating, although I have a degree and probably a good job, it doesn't feel like you expanded yourself. It feels like, okay, that was great when I was there, but now this is where my life is kind of supposed to be, or it feels like it should be over here. So going back there, even if it was for, legitimate reasons, maybe I had to take care of family members, or the money's better over here, you're missing that excitement part that you got when you were in New York in a different environment. Nobody from your family had done anything like that before. You were the first one to go through all that. And then not to mention your internships overseas and all that experience that came from your experience at NYU. So I definitely see how, coming back would feel like it's not quite sitting right there too.
Yeah. That was the first couple of years. And then eventually,
So where did that shift happen after a couple of years? Was it as you were getting your feet set? Was it the companies you were going to? And how did the transition happen from there to Apple?
Eventually I started to really appreciate the culture of Silicon Valley. Like lots of smart people. Right, but it's a more chill vibe.
It's night and day from a New York either investment or lawyer culture where it's very hustle. You gotta go work at it.
Correct. And so I really like that about New York. I really like that energy, like the hustle and bustle of the city. I really enjoyed that. And then coming to Silicon Valley, it was an adjustment. I think the weather's beautiful. You gotta love that.
Yeah. People show up to work in pajamas.
It's much more chill. So I never needed a suit anymore. I had bought a bunch of suits when I was in New York, and they're all not necessary anymore. If you're wearing a suit, you'd be totally out of place.
Yes.
And I think after a while, when I decided that, okay, I'm here to stay, I just opened my mind and my heart really to what's happening here. And one of my favorite moments when it hit me that, okay, I really like this place, was sitting in a coffee shop in Silicon Valley, probably somewhere in Santa Clara, Sunnyvale, etc., and just kind of overhearing these conversations of ideas from different people. Mm-hmm. And I love that energy. I love the energy of there's this energy to create. Mm-hmm. And so I also really saw the power of software. Like I said, I was in management consulting. A lot of my early clients were big software companies, and the speed to go to market with a product that's going to touch millions of lives, that was pretty cool. And to be a part of multiple like software related launches early on in my career from end to end was pretty fun because you could see the impact immediately. And yeah, eventually I got the opportunity to join Apple. I think a recruiter had reached out, and initially I thought it wasn't the right fit for me, to be honest, because I wasn't an Apple fan. I hate to admit it now, but at the time I was very much, an Android user.
You were a Google Android loyalist, I gotcha.
I wouldn't say a loyalist, but I tended to use more of their products, and a lot of my friends were Apple fanatics, and I just thought it was like too much for me. And so when I had that initial conversation, and it was specifically for an international expansion role, because Apple retail at the time had just hired in a new senior vice president to lead retail stores and online. And they were, pursuing a pretty aggressive roadmap for international expansion at the time. And I was one of the first folks to join like a dedicated international expansion core team supporting that roadmap. And it was a very interesting role, but I just didn't know if it was going to be a good fit for me because of, I wasn't a huge Apple fanatic. All my experience up until that point was in software as well. And so the brick and mortar side, of Apple retail was also a little unfamiliar to me. But ultimately, it's about, the beauty of retail nowadays, right? It's omni-channel. It's like there's always a software component and a face-to-face component. I mean, not always, but there is a lot of power in that omni-channel experience. And that's ultimately where Apple was headed, and trying to do so in a very Apple manner. And so I got that opportunity to join, and I wasn't ready to leave my previous job, to be honest, but it was one of those things as well that, okay, you have nothing to lose, because I had great relationships at my old firm, and I got a lot of support actually from my leaders, even at my old firm, when I told them that I had this new opportunity. And there was an open door, hey, this is something you want to try, go for it. And if you want to come back, let's talk. So they made it really easy in some ways for me to make that shift. And it was one of those feelings again for me that, okay, I wonder if I can do it, right? I wonder because when I did get the offer, I just kind of thought to myself, I wonder if I can survive here, right? And play a meaningful role on this team.
Well, it's such the nature of tech that your old company said, "Hey, if it doesn't work, come on back." It's because these, a lot of people who aren't from here don't understand that it's very normal to jump ship from tech company to tech company after a couple of years, and you sort of take on one role here and you go somewhere else. The idea of loyalty to a company that used to exist for our parents doesn't really exist in the tech world. It's like, yeah, we all kind of get it, but in a big company like Apple, with everything that they've been doing and your experience there, people go into that a lot of young people, when they go into college and they want to join tech, they look at the money, they look at the prestige. I'm going to be part of Apple or Google, whatever it is. And they may not understand exactly what that role actually is. And I'll let you expand on this as much as you feel comfortable doing, but
sure.
What can you talk about the expectations of going into a company like that, and what a lot of the realities are you have to be prepared for in working for a place that has a prestige? You can get paid a lot of money, but here's some things you should probably be aware of. Like, do you have 3 tips that you can say before you enter a company like that, X, Y, and Z, so people know what to expect?
Yeah, my recommendation is to always have your own personal definition of success. Otherwise, it's going to be defined for you, right? And so, and second, coming into any new opportunity in your life, like know what your goals are for your life, right? And that's related to having your own definition of success and being really clear on that with yourself. And then sticking to whatever commitments or goals you have for yourself, right? And so whatever, path or things might come at you, you have a North Star that you're working toward, and you keep yourself accountable to that. Because otherwise, it can totally become, it can be a reality that you're constantly reacting to things. And then you become unclear on what your North Star is. And so for me, because coming out of college, I went into a big firm right away, right? And so I didn't know that at first. And I did fall a little bit into that path of chasing, the promotions and trying to move quickly to get to that next level. And for those, early years out of college, I was able to, in my view, like check those boxes, right? And I was doing the things that were said that were required to get to that next level.
Right.
And, but coming into Apple, I realized that, I started to ask, am I being who I want to be? Right? Because often our culture, and for me personally, I was always asking, like, what do I want to do? Like, what is it that I should be doing? It was always about doing. Like, am I doing the right thing? Am I doing something impactful? It's like doing, right? And there's such an emphasis on the doing and the outcomes and the things that are measurable, the things that can be seen. But I started to think, but am I being the person that I want to be? Are the relationships that I have the kinds of relationships that I want to be having? I just remember early on seeing other people in the corporations that I was working with, who were quote unquote successful. Yeah. But their marriages weren't.
That's actually,
or they were quote unquote successful, but then you could tell their health wasn't great, or they're just extremely stressed and burnt out. And I even remember an executive at Apple, ended up retiring early. He didn't need the money anymore. He made it pretty decent amount of money already. But one of the reasons why was because he admitted he'd kind of burnt out, and he wanted to be able to spend more time with his kids, which he wasn't able to do. And so I got exposure to these senior executives like further ahead of me, who are kind of sharing, the different sides to success, the quote unquote success
right.
of getting the money, getting the promotions. And I early on really internalized that and decided for myself that I want to be proud of the person I'm becoming and the relationships that I'm forming in the process of, expanding my impact in the world. So anyways, I think coming into Apple, my mindset was very different. But it can be really easy, like I said, to get really focused on chasing the next promotion or the next, bonus, there's nothing wrong with that. Again, if that is your definition of success, like, all the more power to you. But for some people, I think they haven't actually thought about what success means or looks like to them. And so the external things are kind of forcing them into a definition of success.
Well, you bring up such a good point about talking to senior executives at a big company like Apple or Google or Facebook, who are making plenty of money that they don't have to worry about financially speaking, but they're committing so much of their time to it that it's taken away from time with their families or time spent traveling or enjoying the things they want outside of work. And you coming into a position that you have a very impactful international expansion role in the company. Financially, you're probably doing very well, and you have the prestige of saying I work at Apple at a high level spot. People look at that as saying I want to do what she's actually doing. I want that position. because if I get that, I can then be able to afford a nice home and have a family and have a good work-life balance. And then to hear you also say that, the more you climb up the ladder, tech's no exception, that, if you keep chasing the dollar, if you're somebody who wants to do that, if you're somebody that, just loves to just work, and that's how you get your fill, by all means. But for some people, you got to really ask yourself the question, what does my life look like if I want to devote 60, 70, 80 hours a week to this job? If that's what I want to do, great. But if I want to also have a family or also go travel or also do something else, is this the best spot for me? And you're right. A lot of people don't ask that question. They get, maybe part of it comes from student debt. I got 100 grand in the hole after graduating. I got to get that big job because I got to pay it back. And then you sort of go down the rabbit hole of, well, I'm in it now. I can't leave because I'm kind of financially handcuffed to it.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to knowing who you are and why do you do what you do. I'm not one to prescribe your answers to that, but have an answer. Who are you and why do you do what you do?
Right.
And just taking that pause to think about that. And yeah, if that means working 80 to 100 hours because you have this why, why you're doing that. Mm-hmm. And it's very deeply tied with your sense of identity and who you want to be. And it requires working 100 hours, then, hey, there's nothing wrong with that. I think there's sometimes that idea of balance and stuff like that. I don't know. I don't like that, what kind of work-life balance idea as well. I do think that our lives and are going to all, look differently for everybody. But I think it's just really important to know who you are and why you do what you do. And I don't think many people think about that deeply enough. And they don't really know why they're doing it. They're doing it because everybody else is doing it. Or they're doing it because that's what it looks like. That's what I think I'm supposed to do. Mm-hmm. Versus having your own very deep reason why you do what you do.
It's a big one, especially around here where it's I'm getting a paycheck. I got 6-7 figures on it maybe, and that's good enough, right? But then what are you really working towards? If you're somebody who's single and just wants to work all the time and that's giving you a purpose, great. But if you're in a relationship or married, you have a partner that you got to be on the same page with. Because if I'm at work 70 or 80 hours a week and she doesn't understand that, we're going to have a problem here because we're not on the same page with what I'm actually doing. Unless I have to work 80 hours just to pay the bills, right. In which case maybe we got to work on some sort of financial planning because it shouldn't have to come down to it. But it is something that I see a lot around here with people that I've met who work in the tech industry. It's the money is so good that you start chasing it because you want to be able to afford the nicer home or have the nicer car. Sure. And then you get into the roller coaster and it's, well, now I can't get out because I'm so financially committed to all these things. Right. And who else is going to pay me X amount to go? Maybe I really want to go start my own company. Maybe I really want to go into healthcare, or I want to go do something else that's not as financially lucrative. Right. But I can't do it if I have all these commitments here. So you made such a courageous decision several years ago to say, you know what? I have a great career. I make great money at this great company, one of the FANG tech companies here, and you know what? I'm going to make the big step and say, this is not right for me anymore. I enjoy my time here. I got great experience, but there's something that I really want to do. So talk to me about that realization where you said, this is no longer for me, and I'm going to make that jump to do something that I feel is way more impactful.
Yeah. One of the big lessons I've learned throughout my career in tech is to choose not to be controlled by fear.
That's a good point.
Yeah. And I do think going back to the why, sometimes for many people at the core of why they're doing something is because of fear of loss, fear of the future, fear of this or that. So they're, feeling like they have to, pursue maybe a lot of money or whatnot because of that fear. And I've just, again, deeply motivated by my faith and this passage in the Bible that perfect love casts out all fear. I've just chosen to try to train my mind and my brain, my heart to acknowledge when I do have fear in a situation, but make sure that I'm moving forward because it's the right thing to do and that I'm not letting fear control my actions. And so the move to transition from Apple was one that took a long time, to be honest, because I actually did feel like there was a reason why I was at Apple, and I thoroughly enjoyed being there. I love the people that I work with. They're wicked smart, like very high IQ and EQ, just great personable people and really smart. Sure, there's a lot of hours, and you're working hard, and there were definitely times when I my relationships outside of work suffered a bit, but for me it's because in those seasons I chose to prioritize my work at Apple. For example, in the early days of the pandemic, I was asked to be the lead for COVID response for store operations. I mean, that's over 500 locations in over 20 countries. And it was the early days of the pandemic, so there were so many things unknown. And I was literally working practically 24 hours, 7 days a week, because I'm working across time zones, But in that moment, I chose to put in those hours and work because I wanted to keep our teams and stores safe, So I may have said no to other things at the time. Like, I literally disappeared. So all I'm saying is that, being at Apple was very special. I think I learned so much. And it's one thing I learned at Apple was putting people at the center of everything. Like, that's the key. When it comes to product development, designing things or projects, it's all about the people and how do you put people at the center of it. And so taking that idea, because of my background growing up in the Philippines, I had always had a desire to reconnect back with the Philippines. It was always in the back of my mind as like, a thing. It's going to just be a part of my life. I don't know when, I don't know how. So I'd gone back to the Philippines a couple times through mission trips with my churches. And in 2019, right before the pandemic, I was there for a conference. I was speaking at a conference in Manila, and I decided to host a pitch competition for Filipino youth, just in the spirit of wanting to give back. And I hosted this pitch competition, and it was more successful than I thought it would be. It was great, and it opened up my eyes to the talent that was in the Philippines. Like, these young people pitched their ideas, and they did such a tremendous job. We awarded scholarships and iPhones, and just had a really good time with these Filipino youth. And the event was called Dream Bigger Manila. That was just an invitation that we threw out there. And after that event, there were a lot of other adult Filipino entrepreneurs that stayed in touch with me and started reaching out to me. And I just out of a desire, again, to help, I started helping in whatever way that I could while still in Silicon Valley. And that ended up launching me in, a series of relationships that I began to invest in with people in the Philippines, meeting with people over Zoom. And then during the pandemic, I continued that because we all know the pandemic hit everyone really hard, and the Philippines included. Economically, a lot of folks that I knew in the Philippines were just having a hard time. And so I think I continued to connect with a lot of people in the Philippines all throughout the pandemic as much as I could, and wanted to help. But all of that said, I think when you begin to see that there's a need, it deepens your empathy for something. And that's what eventually happened to me, is that, these relationships kind of expanded out, and I began to hear and see the needs of people in the Philippines, and felt that, maybe there's something I can do to help. And then eventually I was just kind of torn. Like, my work at Apple was, required my brain to think one way, and then my, work connecting and trying to help people in the Philippines required my brain to think another way. And practically speaking, I was like just nonstop working because I was trying to be I was trying to do my job and then be helpful to people in the Philippines at the same time. And again, my focus has largely been supporting Filipino entrepreneurs and, trying to provide, coaching and access to capital and, helping them take their venture to the next level. And so I tried for a long time to do both. But the urgency and the need in the Philippines, and my feeling that maybe I'm uniquely positioned to help there because of my background, because of my story and my experiences, maybe there's something here in the Philippines that I can uniquely contribute. Whereas, you know, and maybe the time is now, right? And so I tried to, you know, hold on to the Apple opportunity for a while, but the urgency and the opportunity to help just kept going up and up and up. And after a lot of conversations and time with God, time talking to my boss, you know, talking to a lot of different people, I decided that the time was now to be part of, creating livelihood in the Philippines, especially in light of the devastation that the pandemic has caused. So
wow.
That's why I made that jump. It was not an easy decision. It was very honestly drawn out a lot, because I did feel that my work at Apple was meaningful, you know, and I did have that sense. And
well, also with that, I mean, you also have to be thinking about, if I leave this job here to go start a company, then, you know, how do I like sort of pay for my bills in between then, you know, where do I live? Am I okay making that big jump? Which I'm sure a lot of people would be thinking the same thing too, is maybe I want to leave a company like that, but can I survive out there? Ooh, how did you process that?
I think when you fall in love with a problem, right? I mean, the problem for me is, you know, underemployment in the Philippines was continuing to go up, and the pandemic wasn't going to was not helping it, and it was just, it's such a big problem, and I think I just kind of fell in love with the problem that nothing else mattered. Like I felt like I need to be part of trying to solve this problems in my country, and so. Yes, you know, people might say it was ill-advised to leave, you know, this my career at Apple during the pandemic, because I left in 2021. But like, yeah, I just think that opportunity to be part of solving this problem was greater in that moment. And I mean, it wasn't completely without analysis and thinking, you know.
I understand that. Yeah.
And I think, you know, we're all gifted with resources and a brain and an opportunity to be planful. And so, you know, part of that was kind of projecting out, like, what are ways that I can reduce my expenses? You know, I got rid of my own apartment, right? I really minimized my expenses. And I'm continuing to do so that I can self-fund a lot of what I'm working on in the Philippines. And of course, I have a great group of mentors and advisors and family who have been behind me from the inception stage, you know? And so I had that support around me to go for it. Like, I wasn't a lone ranger, just sort of by myself. And with that kind of support and community, I felt like, okay, let's go for it. And sure, I feel like I'm leaving money on the table, you know, and I felt like there was so much room for impact and growth at Apple, 100%. Like, I felt like I did not expect to leave Apple in 2021. Like, no way. Before the pandemic, I didn't expect that at all. I had a long-term view, honestly, for my time at Apple.
And it was more about, wasn't that you couldn't grow with Apple. The opportunities were there, and you would have loved to been a part of it, but there was just something that you said, this is where I really need to be at. This requires more of my time, and I'm so thankful for my time at Apple. Yes. With that, if you were to give advice to anybody about how to survive in a tech environment, what would be your best piece of advice to anybody getting into, from your experience, Apple especially, about how to get through the daily life, about what to plan for, what to expect with expectations? How would you give people the best advice to survive in that environment?
Again, always know why you're doing what you're doing. You know, I think and this applies to anyone at any level. If you're being asked to do something and you don't really know why you're doing it, that's a problem. So, whether you're an intern, an analyst, or a senior executive, just always knowing, why is this work, this project, this assignment, whatever, what's the reason for it? How does it connect to the big picture goals of the organization? Mm-hmm. Know that. And if you don't know that, that's a problem in my mind. And that knowing that, like how your work connects to the bigger picture, allows you to prioritize better. Because otherwise, you're constantly going to be reacting. Because there's an endless amount in technology, it's beautiful because you can always optimize it and make it better, faster, stronger, all of these things. So the pace, it's fast, for sure. And that's the beauty of it. So if you don't want that fast pace, it may not be a good fit for you. But if you're excited by that fast pace,
yeah,
which, honestly, I am. I love that pace. But there's always just endless opportunities to innovate and optimize something.
Right.
Which is why I keep harping back. Know why you're doing this, why it's important, how it connects back to the bigger picture objectives of whatever team you're on, and so that you can prioritize better and you manage your energy better. And at the same time, understand that you are a person with a mind, body, spirit, soul. So you're not a machine.
Right.
So yes, I love people that work hard. I value work, I value excellence and all of that kind of stuff. And you should apply that same, desire for excellence in how you take care of your body, your mind, your spirit, your soul, and your relationships. Like, be ambitious, like holistically.
That makes sense.
Because your body, when you're not caring for your body, you're not eating well, you're not sleeping well, you're not exercising, honestly, it does impact how you think.
People have no idea how true that is.
Yeah, and I learned that a little bit the hard way, because I was just working a ton for a season of my career, and my back started hurting. Right, I was just like already in my 20s, like feeling, when you're on a computer a lot, like unfortunately your posture, right, all of this kind of stuff. So I had to learn, okay, how do I take care of my body so that I can have a long and healthy and successful, impactful life. And that connection between your physical wellness and fitness with your mental capacity. That wasn't always, I think I knew that, like, at a high level, because I grew up as an athlete, but, really committing to a healthier lifestyle, it was a slow progression for me, but when I started to feel the results, like when I ate better and I exercised more, my brain was sharper, right? And when in the work that I was previously doing, I needed my brain to be sharp all the time. And so I was like, I better keep eating healthy and running, because I want my brain sharp all the time. I need to remember a lot of things and like keep a lot of pieces like straight in my head. And anyway, so I would say anyone wanting to work in the fast-paced tech environment, like, know your why, right? And if you don't have clarity on that, I worry that you're not going to be prioritizing your time and energy well. And that's, you can't afford to do that. So know why you're doing it, and then prioritize effectively. Figure out how to do that well, and then understand that you are a whole being. You're a mind, body, spirit, soul, and understand that, like, taking care of your body and your spirit and your soul will directly impact your mind.
I seem to think you read Simon Sinek's book on how to find your why.
I am a fan of Simon, 100%.
That guy's, he gives a lot of great advice. It's good because you really kind of have to figure out why you actually do what you do. I do want to get into your tech company, but
Sure.
First there was some that I wanted to ask you specifically related to during your time in a corporate environment, whether it was, actually I kind of want to talk about both, your time in New York and also your time working in tech. There's questions that I get, and we kind of talked about with my last guest that I had on prior to you, which is, did you ever feel that there's a way that maybe as a woman in the workplace that you either felt like you were getting overlooked for promotions, and then was there a certain way that you felt you had to act in order to make things happen? Some people ask me to ask my guests about the idea of imposter syndrome, the idea that maybe you're supposed to put on this face, but you really don't feel like you understand that. Did you ever get any of that either from your time in New York or even at Apple, where you sort of had a question, okay, how do I work through this kind of an issue?
Again, I was the youngest of, I keep saying was, I am the youngest of 8 kids. I grew up quiet. And I was called shy a lot. And I internalized that identity for a very long time. And I grew up not being, immigrant, and I would get thrown into these environments with, non-immigrant students, and would see how they can raise their hand and articulate their ideas so clearly. And I remember being in middle school, and there were times when I had these ideas in my head, but when I started talking, it wasn't coming out the way that I wanted it in my head, So there were, anyways, all that said, that being called shy when I was little was a really big thing that took a long time to overcome for me to discover my voice, so to speak, and to understand that, hey, if you're in a setting, you're in a meeting, and I've had mentors that have taught me this and showed me this. Like, hey, if you're in a meeting, it doesn't matter if you're the most junior person in the room, like, you're there for a reason. So show up. Show up. And I also, you're right, being a woman and Filipino, a little bit different skin tone than other people that I was working with, I was always conscious that I just kind of felt, I did feel different. I did feel different in those, in my, early work environments. And overcoming the imposter syndrome is real. Like, it is a real, almost daily process, especially now being a founder and CEO of my own company. It's like, who am I to be doing that? Like, it's even greater now, but thank God for the experiences and the character formation that I have had a chance to experience, right, in the past several years. But it's, as far as being, overlooked or whatnot, it's hard for me to say. Who knows? I mean,
or how about,
because it's hard to know, like, what those conversations, would have been.
For example, if you ever have had a promotion and you were told no, and how did you process that? And how did you sort of take the next step to say, I have to, and this may be more true in the New York environment, which is a little more old school traditional finance and lawyering and whatnot. As in, if you weren't getting what you felt you deserved to get based upon what you've actually done in the workforce, was there how do I process that? Because I see some other people getting the promotions that maybe I don't think did as good of a work as I did. Right. How did you process that? It's one thing that I had somebody who is high in one of the tech companies, and she's always looking for answers to that, is how do you, when you're told no, process that and move forward, probably especially more as a woman than as a man in those environments.
I'll respond to that. I did want to go back to one example of how my environment impacted me is in communication. I did realize very early on that communication is important. Being able to communicate is important. And I also began to see how people respond to tones, and I began to see that, how a higher pitch tone in a meeting with a bunch of men, it's going to be heard differently, and it's going to, you're going to get a different response versus a little bit of a lower pitch tone, and you're communicating like this way, which is a little bit more masculine. Like, that is a thing. It's definitely a thing. And I have had to learn, to communicate, like, all those different tips and tricks almost for how to communicate effectively to be heard, and often in the environments that I've been a part of, it has required adopting more of those masculine tendencies for communication. I didn't even know I was doing that. I didn't know I was doing that, but because of the, the people around me and the people in higher positions, right? Naturally, I was trying to emulate
Right.
their pattern. And it's funny because now I'm recognizing when I do that, and I'm trying to unlearn it. I'm trying to unlearn it all. But that's just an example where there is an opportunity, and for us, especially as like Asian women, to really find our voice and stick with it. Stick with it. Don't try to, and it's one of I think the blessings of being an immigrant sometimes is you're good at adapting.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes you can take it too far where you're trying to be so adaptable because you think that's what you need to succeed, and you lose yourself. And I do think, like that is, sometimes it's even subconscious, like I said, and it's really important for us to just find our voice and stick with it. And if that is not being, if you feel like you're not being respected, or you're not, being properly compensated because of you being yourself, then you're not in the right environment.
Do you think that at any sort of level, the pressure to have to put on a certain image factored into you saying this may not be the right thing for me down the line, as maybe another way to say this new venture that I want to do is for me? Do you think that ever played into it, or you've adapted to it and it wasn't really something you thought about too much?
And this goes back to your definition of success and why you do what you do.
Mm-hmm.
If part of your goal is to like move up the ladder in a certain time frame, then great. But for me, my biggest goal and definition of success is really to grow more like Jesus in terms of leadership and character and relationships. And that means living a life of love and trying to love people. And, and so my brain and way of operating is oriented toward that pursuit of success. And of course, the work and achieving these milestones from a business perspective are important to me. But more important is the process of how I get there and the character that I'm building when I'm in that process. Like, I count that as the success, how I get there. And so with that in mind, it's, I think my journey continues to be in that pursuit, right? And the best thing for me to keep growing more like Jesus and growing in my faith was to make that jump. And that excited me. So I was more moving toward a greater opportunity that I felt like I could uniquely pursue versus trying to leave something where there's always that push and pull when you're in the crossroads. You're either trying to leave something or you're trying to move towards something. Maybe it's a little bit of both. But I think for me personally, it was just this really kind of big dream that I wanted to go after. And I wanted to hold on. I was trying really hard to hold on to something, but it wasn't working. And so I decided to just go after that bigger opportunity that I saw.
That's so bold of you to do, because there is a comfort in having that good job with the benefits and whatnot. But over here saying this is what's really going to give me a purpose or a deeper understanding of something that I can do that I can't do over here at this job. And that's so great to actually see it do.
And I think that it is important to consider that. I think there are some toxic workplaces out there. Don't get me wrong, right?
Yeah.
I think there 100% are. And so if you need to get out, please, pursue a better environment that's going to be better for your overall well-being. But generally speaking, I recommend, and I've tried to kind of adopt this in my life, is don't move because you're just trying to get away from something. Make sure you're excited about that next step, that next thing, for whatever reason, because you think you're going to learn more, right? You're going to grow in character. You're going to get new experiences. Mm-hmm. Be excited about what's next. And if you're not quite sure, if nothing's really exciting you, then stay still. Keep looking and keep, digging and asking more people, expanding your mind, building your relationships with other people to kind of get excited about that thing that's next. And not just be motivated by, I don't like this, I'm going to leave.
Good
and then
point.
the next thing, the grass may not always be greener on that side.
I've gone through that myself at some point, and it speaks to something that a lot of people in their late 20s and their 30s, our generation here, is if you get too caught up in trying to have all the material stuff, the cars, the big houses, the nice jewelry, whatever, you got to pay for that. And if by paying for it means you have to be stuck at a job you don't like, then you put yourself in a compromising spot to be in. And I've learned that as I get older, is that I really try to minimize my finances, like what you did prior to when you left your company, is that, do I really need to spend money on A, B, and C? What do I really need? Just because I don't have this and society says I'm supposed to have that, like a big house, does that make it any less worthwhile? Well, a house is just a place where I live. I sleep in, I have a roof over my head. That's all I really need. I don't need 5 bedrooms, and I'm not going to have anything to do with them or just wasted space so much. So it allows me to be able to say, if I don't need this much money to have to live, then I have more freedom to figure out what else can I do with my time. Can I save up more money and whatnot?
Yeah.
But getting into your company now, this is the exciting part. How did you create this vision?
Can I go back to your earlier question?
Yeah, go
Because
ahead.
I feel like I skipped over it. You asked about disappointment, like when you're wanting a promotion
Oh, yes.
and maybe you don't get it, and then how do you move forward from it? I thought that's just such a great question. And I've experienced that for sure.
Yeah, speak to it.
That disappointment, right? When you feel like you deserved this and you didn't get it. And it's okay to be sad. It's okay to, be disappointed by it, and then ask questions about, why. And, try to reach that point of understanding, right? With your leaders, with your organization, like, where is the misalignment? And honestly, I do think many organizations, especially the really big ones, they're not, like, there's a huge opportunity to clarify what the expectations are for a promotion. Because sometimes there is that misalignment. Like, hey, I thought I did the thing I was supposed to, but then how come the outcome is still here? And and I think if you're doing great work, advocate for yourself, and don't be afraid to do that, and be really clear on knowing your worth and your value and being able to quantify it as best as you can, like, hey, I drove this impact, and like having that confidence. But you're right, the disappointment does happen sometimes. And for me, I've used those moments as ways to grow in character and developing a longer view of success for my life. And at the same time, I realize now that disappointment in my life is probably something that I can use later on to be helpful to somebody else who might be going through a disappointment. And I can be more, just encouraging to that person later down the line. And so it's like, how can this experience, be used to be helpful to others in the future? And I think every experience that we have, whether it's good or bad, right? Experiences that you might think it's a liability, but later down the line, hey, it might actually be something that allows you to connect with somebody else that can meaningfully impact their life in that moment.
Mm-hmm. And it's not the end of the world. I mean, I've had times where I've been given opportunities to go to New York or Florida or DC and never worked out. At first you're like, oh, so that means I'm not good enough. And then you realize going through it, what the other person may have got when they went there. Actually, maybe it was a better idea I didn't get that, because I may have been stuck somewhere and not knowing how to get out of the environment as you progress on there. So funny how things always happen to work out for the better. You just don't see it right away.
You don't. But disappointment's hard. It's not just work too. Disappointments in relationships or, family disappointing you. It is a very difficult thing.
That's a good point I wanted to bring up since we're talking about this. You are a CEO of a company, and you're pretty much going around the Philippines. You're around this country. I mean, you're going. How do you find the balance between your career, your work, and maybe even your personal relationships, whether it's individual, whether it's family? How do you really find that balance and everything? One question that a lot of people are trying to figure out right now, especially in our generation.
Yeah. it's a work in progress, right? Like many people. And I think for me, I see like family or relationships and business as not like conflicting, right? Because impacting people is impacting the business. And a lot of my business is relationship oriented. And a big part of our vision is to create livelihood for families to flourish in the Philippines. And a big part of the vision is to restore a family, create livelihood. Those two go hand in hand. And that phenomenon in the Philippines is that because of a lack of livelihood, sustainable livelihood in the country, spouses have to leave or they have to separate. They have to go abroad for a better job opportunity, and families get broken apart. And and then over time, often those couples don't get to reunite for a variety of different reasons. And so there's the social impact that we're not even able to quantify, right? Where kids are growing up in unstable home environments. And then that creates generational, a lot of, implications for the next generation. And so it's interesting that you asked that question, because my response now is probably very different than what it was many years ago working in tech. But because family and livelihood are so intertwined with the vision that I'm pursuing, I am very deeply motivated to ensure that as I'm building this business, like my relationships are equally flourishing, and so I'm trying very hard to discover what that could look like, to create that harmony between like work and relationships. And part of that is, like I said, choosing not to operate out of fear. Because often entrepreneurs, I think, they maybe get a little bit out of balance, so to speak, when they're working so much because they're scared that they're going to run out of runway, you're going to be behind, or you have to, there's just all this fear of the future. So you're chasing. But when you're operating out of this sense of freedom and abundance, that, hey, I get to do this, right? I get to do this, and I have the freedom to do this. And it just creates this different way of operating and pursuing the goals. And then for me, understanding that actually my family is getting involved in my business as well. So that's been an interesting development for me, where, I have family members that are actually actively helping me with Dream Bigger Ventures, which is my new company. And so it's created a new way of working, a new way of operating, and harmony. Me investing in my family relationships directly, positively impacts my business.
I like how you see that now, and how you admitted that if I asked you that question 10 years ago, it would have been a different response.
I would have seen family and career as conflicting. I don't know why. I know why now, because that's what the culture around me was suggesting, especially for women. When you pause to have kids, when maybe you're working less to be in that phase to have children and raise kids, etc., then the narrative is that your career is going to suffer. The promotion opportunities are going to suffer, right, in the corporate environment. And so I was in that environment. But now with the mindset that I have, that I'm building a business that I want to pass down to my children. And it's a long-term vision. Like, it's a 30-year vision to be part of radically transforming a nation. Inevitably, I cannot do that overnight. I cannot do that week over week, quarter over quarter. It's a long game that I want to be a part of. And that classic African proverb, right? If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I've realized when I look at the problems in the Philippines, broken family, poverty, corruption, and they're all interrelated in my mind, I want to be a part of growing the ecosystem of institutions that are going to effectively solve those problems in the next 30 plus years of my life. And so my vision for Dream Bigger Ventures is very long term. We're actively, doing a lot of things to drive impact immediately because people need help immediately. But I do have that long-term view, and a big part of my motivation is to be able to build a business that I'm going to be able to pass down to my kids and their kids and their kids. And so my vision for business and family has just merged so much at this point in my life. And so investing in relationships directly, positively impacts my business.
It's great that you see that now, because a lot of us, when we get out of college and we had to get a job, the pressure to have to go make the money, you got to go. That means I got to work 80 hours a week. That's what it is. Like the proverb you were saying.
Again, I hate throwing out numbers because it might require 80 hours a week, right? But like, hopefully it's not all the time.
I mean, as long as you understand this
Yeah.
is what it's going to take. Maybe you do have to put the work in now because you're building something bigger in the future. So you got to put in the 100 hours a week now. But if you see the long-term thing, but if you don't see where it's going, next thing you know, the years pass on and it's like, wait, what happened the last 5 years?
Exactly.
You realize how after we get past 21, the years just seem to fly by so much faster.
Yeah.
It's like, you work so much. It's what are you working for? Is it just the money, or is there something else? And it doesn't really click for us until we get probably in our late 20s, early 30s, sometimes in our late 30s. Like, oh yeah, what am I really doing? And what's the point of me saving all this money for if you can't take it with you? Denzel Washington's famous misquote of "You'll never see a U-Haul behind a hearse." It's like, yeah, you can't take it all with you. What are you doing to enjoy your life now?
Right.
And giving back to people. And
Yeah.
your message and your goal of trying to get this long-term vision of improvement in the Philippines, it's very bold, and I can definitely understand why it's something that needs to happen. And how are you working so how does your work take you from here to there to around the country? Are you building networks? What are you doing to help get the business going?
Yeah. Yes. So I was in the Philippines last year for several months. And my focus at the time was, again, to more deeply understand the needs of the market. So I met with a lot of Filipino entrepreneurs. I launched my first cohort-based accelerator program with a cohort of Filipino entrepreneurs, learned a lot from that in terms of needs of early stage founders, from a leadership development perspective, business training perspective, and then fundraising readiness. There's a lot of components there to get Filipino entrepreneurs ready for foreign investment potentially. And it was great. That first cohort went really well, and learned a lot. And I, launched my second cohort as well earlier this year. And being here in the U.S. has been really helpful for a number of different reasons. So one, there are a lot of organizations, and I have mentors and advisors here in the U.S. who have done this kind of work, right? Building ecosystems and building, really strong entrepreneurial networks in other countries, like in Africa or South America, et cetera. And so a big benefit of being here is just being able to spend time with leaders who are in doing similar work in other countries. And then I can then understand how I can apply that to accelerate the work that I'm doing in the Philippines.
Gotcha.
And at the same time, I have, there are potential other partners or investors here in the U.S. who are interested in learning about opportunities to potentially invest in the Philippines either now or in the long term. And so I'm also building out those relationships. And what's important for me is values alignment.
Right.
And
big one.
Yeah, it's a big one. Values aligned, relationships. So with that relationship building, the Zoom is great, virtual is great, but because I do have an opportunity now to connect with people in person, that's just been huge in really strengthening trust and discovering, ways that we can collaborate that maybe I didn't even know about. Because like I said, the problems we want to solve are so great, like restoring family and creating millions of jobs in the Philippines. No single organization is, in my mind, going to be able to achieve the type of culture shift and family impact that we want to have. We need other partners and truly an ecosystem of partners, both in the Philippines and abroad, to bring that vision to life. So again, building out those partnerships here has been amazing. I've been traveling around the country and just getting to know other investors who've done this kind of, impact investing in other places, and then trying to understand, okay, how can we localize those approaches for the needs in the Philippines? And at the same time, I still work Manila time often. So I stay up, Manila starts to wake up around 5 p.m. Pacific. So I often have meetings from 5 p.m. until late into the evening Pacific time to meet with entrepreneurs or other partners in the Philippines as well, who are on the ground, building the businesses, or we're incubating some projects right now in 10 regions in the Philippines. So, there's a lot of work happening there. And so I'm trying to, discover the right capital bridges that are going to be the right fit for these projects and ventures that we're incubating and accelerating in the Philippines.
That's such great work. I'm excited to see the future of it. Like I said, long-term thing. The year or two, you may not see a lot, but in 5 years, you'll start 10 years, and you start seeing the bigger picture there. So are you still based here, or you are based in the Philippines?
I'm still based in, technically California, but I did receive my Filipino citizenship again, so I'm a dual citizen now.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
It's awesome to have that.
So long-term, I'm planning to spend more time in the Philippines.
All right. What is the best advice you would give to Filipino-Americans who come here with the cultural mindset that we talked about in the beginning of this is the way it is, and my career opportunities may be limited to only healthcare or law? What's the best advice you can give them based upon what you've seen out in the world and how to actually make it out here?
Dream bigger.
Dream bigger.
Dream bigger.
How about getting away from the pressure of the family? Because I know that's a big one. If mom and dad or the aunts and uncles are all saying you're kind of supposed to do this, why aren't you doing that?
Yeah. I think you're right. The pressures are real. They're real, and in Filipino culture, we value family tremendously, and it's a very community-oriented culture, and everyone's looking out for each other, and you don't want to do anything that kind of rocks the boat.
Yeah.
So there's this implicit celebration of conformity. And so doing something different outside of the norm, it could feel like you're disappointing your family or your tribe or whatever that tribe might be.
Right.
And I go back to why, knowing that why is the why going to sustain you beyond that feeling of initial disappointment, and I think it goes back to, from a business perspective, like falling in love with the problem that you're trying to solve.
That's a good point.
Like
and
knowing the problem, like what is it? And then like you just can't think of anything else. Literally, like I couldn't. Yeah, and so I think it's just important to find that. And if you're not quite there yet, it's okay. It's okay. Keep searching. Keep just being curious. Ask questions. Get yourself out there. Go to that conference. Pay for that book. Pay for that class. Like, there's so many different ways to open up your mind, and I would just invite them to do that. But sometimes in Filipino culture, we do tend to stay in our circles, and
do you see a danger to conformity? Do you see people, especially in the culture, who they're doing what mom and dad and the aunts tell them to, but deep down you can tell they, did I do the right thing? Did I miss out on an opportunity? Have you had those conversations with people?
Yeah, I think that happens quite a bit. I mean, just look at how many Filipino nurses there are around the world.
Yes.
It's a thing, and even in my own family, a number of my siblings did end up going the healthcare route largely because of parent encouragement,
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, it's a thing, but it's never too late to try something new. Like that's the encouragement. Like sure, look back, acknowledge like, hey, maybe you would have done things differently, but you could start today. If you want to go try something new, you could start today.
And if somebody needs the courage to say, you know, this is how it actually is done, then you're a great resource to talk to, because you're a prime example of growing up in a culture where it was kind of told you should do this, but you did have the courage to go way beyond the box, going from one side of the country to the other to school, having that support with your family, which maybe some people's families are like, no, you're not going anywhere. You're staying here because that's what you're supposed to do. And look at where it's led you to, back to Silicon Valley, to now being your own CEO of a company, trying to do things that is it's going to be such a great thing to have in the Philippines. And probably the next 20 or 30 years, we're going to look back at your company and say, this is where it all started. That one decision to leave, you know, a really good job at a tech company where you could have been, you know, taken care of forever, to say, you know what, I'm going to make that leap and do something that I really want to do that's going to make a bigger impact in other people's lives, and ultimately give me, meaning you, probably a better sense of peace that, okay, this is going to help me live a longer and more enjoyable life than just maybe conforming to things that were great at a time and they're great companies, but just not for me anymore. Right. So it's a big step to take, and I'm really glad to see you take that. I'm excited for the future of it. Where can people reach out to you at, and what's the best way to sort of promote the cause, if you will?
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, I would invite people to follow us on Facebook or Instagram at Dream Bigger Philippines on both platforms. We also have our own podcast featuring stories of Filipino entrepreneurs, and you can check out our website at dreambiggerph.com to get in touch. So
perfect.
Feel free to reach out.
And is the organization looking for any help? Are they hiring? Is it still a work in progress to get the legs down, the foundation?
Yeah, no, we will be hiring this year. At this point, there are, if we have a dreambiggerph.com/partner page. So if you're interested in learning more about ways to get involved, feel free to check that out.
Great. And then do you have a personal Instagram that they can reach out to you at?
I do. Yeah. At Christeen.Rico. Pretty simple.
Rico. And how do you spell that to make sure we're on the same page?
CHRISTEEN, Christeen.Rico, RICO.
Perfect. And I'll put the links down in the description for all my audience to go out and reach out to you if they want to learn more about the organization and to see your progress and where you've come. And maybe if they want to reach out to you and ask questions about, you know, your transition from tech and what you're supposed to do, maybe within a cultural setting, to being able to do what you're doing now.
Yeah. So, and it's okay to fail. Yeah. For those Filipinos listening, we get so scared of failure, but just try it. And it's okay if it fails.
It's okay.
You're going to be okay.
We all fail at some point and it's about how you persevere over that, because you're never going to be perfect in life. There's always going to be something that comes up, and it's how do you respond to that.
Yeah.
That's a bigger lesson for everything. Christeen, thank you for coming on.
Thank
you.
It
was an honor to have you here, and as always, I learned a lot about things that I never would have known about tech culture, starting your own company, even a little bit about the Filipino culture, as I have many Filipino friends around here. And thank you to everybody who's watching. Please like and subscribe to the video if you enjoyed it, so we can get the message out there. Christeen Rico, thank you again. Everybody have a good day.
Thanks.